Hey everyone, my name is Scruffy. Today I got a rather experimental build guide for you for the upcoming 324 Necropolis League. We heavily improved in how we are doing our builds, even if they're not your common League starter builds like Detonate Dead or Lightning Arrow. I also want to add that this is a new gem that has not yet been released, so one of the main concerns that we have about it was not yet testable, but I will address this as soon as we hop into it. I just want to give myself a quick shout out and say that I will be playing Path of Exile for the first time on my stream instead of the old World of Warcraft I always do. And if you're interested, you can hop into my stream on Twitch and hang out for a bit. And without further ado, let's bounce into our poisonous concoction of bouncing guide. We will be using Path of Building a lot today, because this gem has not been yet released, so bear with me. I also have my own Path of Building guide here on YouTube, as well as other guides like a crafting or new player guide. Let's start with our beloved leveling section and hope that Taita is happy about it. Poisonous Concoction is a great leveling skill, and the positive news is that we can already start using it in Act 2. The negative news is that our gem setup and weapon will change drastically after Act 1. In Act 1, we start as a ranger and pick up our explosive arrow on the beach. We will keep it for bosses later on during Act 1, and in town, we pick up caustic arrow and pierce. Throughout Act 1, we will adapt to these gems. During Act 1, we still use a bow. Make sure to not spend too much high value currencies like transmutation orbs on buying a new bow, because as soon as we use Pecan, and from now on I will refer to Poisonous Concoction as Pecan, we will not use a main hand weapon anymore, but a shield only instead. Starting in Act 2, we travel back to Act 1 and get Poisonous Concoction from Nessa, including the other gems that we can pick up. Throughout Act 2, we add Blood Rage, Skitterbots and Herald of Agony to our build. I want to give you right here a big disclaimer. Pecan restricts you from using a weapon in your main hand. Your main hand weapon slot needs to be empty. If you ever find yourself not being able to use Pecan anymore, check your weapon. You might have picked up a one-handed weapon that equipped itself automatically. We are also going to kill all bandits in Act 2. In Act 3, especially after the library, we are adding several more gems to our build. This will be the second to last time that we switch our gems. Also, make sure that you start checking the vendor for 4-linked items starting in Act 3. In Act 5, we will use our final gem setup as listed here. After Act 5, you will already gain a resistance penalty on your armor, so you might want to check that out and add some resistances with your crafting bench. Also, we want to complete Trial of Ascendancies as per usual after Act 3, 7 and in Act 9 just before Kitava. No matter how you feel more comfortable to clear the Trial of Ascendancies, just make sure to clear the third lap before you kill the final boss in Act 10. Otherwise, you might struggle to fix your resistances for it and have to postpone that huge power gain from the Ascendancy to a later time. Poisonous Concoction uses Life Flask charges to increase its power. You cannot stop it from using them. Make sure to maybe use a few more than just one if you're really feeling uncomfortable without a Life Flask, especially during the campaign and early mapping. Because of this, we will not use the Life Flask Ascendancy of the Pathfinder, what they're so famous for. We chose Pathfinder for the Wither Ascendancy nodes, which is the first one you want to scale. The second Ascendancy is either Master Toxicist or the Flask Charge Ascendancy. Master Toxicist just further improves our damage, considering you're still in the campaign, and use maybe 2 or 3 life flasks. With more level and passive skills to gain flask charges, we skill then Nature's Adrenaline. I might underestimate the power of Nature's Boon and how strong magic utility flasks might be, especially thinking about just the sheer running speed during the campaign, but I have been always more focused on damage during the campaign. This might not be the best idea, but old habits die slow. If you think you want to switch these ascendancies around a little bit and skill Nature's Boon earlier, you do you. The leveling tree. Here's the full leveling tree. Let's go through this. During the campaign, you will get a total of 20 regret points. Even though we usually don't care about unskilling passives too much in our advanced builds, we listen to the feedback of you guys from the last season and try to keep the leveling tree as close to the mid-game tree as possible. We are currently spending a total of 10 regret points to unskill whenever we switch from campaign to early mapping. For the beginning in Act 1, we're going for the projectile damage. Poisonous Concoction later on will also be a projectile that scales with the projectile damage. Just a note with the bows is just for Act 1, and we will be unskilling this rather sooner than later. If you already have some regret points later on to the campaign, you can already unskill those 2 points. In Act 2, we're going to start progressing with Poisonous Concoction. Because we're using so many Life Flask charges, we want to skill the first Flask Charge passive nodes. Afterwards, we're going down on the talent tree and skill even more Life Flask charges, plus the Life Flask gains charges every 3 seconds mastery, and then continue with poison damage and poisons you inflict deal damage 20% faster. Afterwards, we continue on the right side, get some more maximum life, and another poison node with the poison mastery that enemies poisoned by you cannot deal critical strikes anymore. Afterwards, we continue back on the top left side and skill that chaos damage node and the chaos mastery that will recover 1% life per wither debuff on enemies we kill. This should be already after the point of our first ascendancy. We go further up and get the entropy passive node that even further boosts our damage output. Around about level 50, we're gonna get more maximum life on the right side again and some poison nodes again on the right side. During the campaign, we will still have enough talent points left to skill into the spell suppression on the right side as well, and don't forget to skill the passive node that chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. Towards the end of the campaign, towards level 60, we're gonna be skilling on the right side the mana reservation efficiency and the mana node, and on the left side the charisma, passive node, and the mastery that we're gonna get 10% increased effect of our auras. Because we're not currently planning to use too many auras during the leveling campaign, we're totally free to skill them now towards the end of the campaign and start adapting using more auras. You will find the whole leveling tree in our path of building or in our written guide on our website. Most important changes during the mid-game are the top right talents. We're skilling even more mana reservation efficiency because we're going to be struggling without an enlightened gem or our unique helmet that we're going to talk about later. Therefore, we're also going to be skilling into Eldritch Battery and into Whispers of Doom. We get a little bit more damage therefore, before we also get Cluster Jewels in the endgame. We're going to be going for the Chaos damage nodes in the top right, totally in the bottom of the tree. We're going to be skilling more effect of Onslaught and Armor and Evasion during Onslaught, and Life Regeneration equal to our Armor and Evasion rating, and more health and Flask Charge gain. For the endgame, where we're also going to have a little bit better gear, we're going to talk about later, we're going to be using Cluster Jewels and regular Jewels as our biggest damage boost. We later on want to use 2 large Cluster Jewels and around about 3 medium Cluster Jewels to reach around about level 91. Talking about gear, and we're going to be starting with our helmet first. Later on in the game, we wanted Devouring Diadem. And you maybe remember this helmet from back in the days. This helmet was used by so many builds left and right. Afterwards, Renegade Games has nerfed the drop chance. Katarina has now a very small chance, back in the days it was 25%, to drop this helmet. Most builds have no longer recommended this helmet anymore. We are bringing it back for one good reason. Later on when we're going to talk about Atlas passive tree, it might even make more sense, but I do believe that more people in the future will be running Katarinas. If Renegade Games did not nerf the drop rate even further, because more people are going to be running Katarina now, I do think that the market is going to be flooded with more of these helmets and less builds nowadays are requiring or recommending this helmet. I do think that even for SSF players, this helmet might be a really good goal to aspire to, but anyways, for the mid-game, as long as we don't have this, we're going to be using a rare helmet with mana reservation efficiency as an essence, with life, resistances, and maybe AoE gems and area of effect crafted, or from a V-Lore. Eldritch Implicit is going to be mana reservation efficiency and Despair Curse effect. As a body armor, and this is going to be the expensive one, we were suggesting the Covenant. The Covenant is going to add a 7th gem to our Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing Gem. While this provides the biggest damage gain that we can get from a chest, it might be really expensive, and especially for SSF players, not very target farmable. A more acquirable unique chest would be Dendrobate. If you use Dendrobate before the Covenant, just make sure that you're going to reach the dexterity and intelligence requirements to use the effects of this chest. As gloves, you want Azina's Gentle Touch. These gloves give us Explosion when we run over corpses and curse enemies with Temporal Chains on hit. The combination of Temporal Chains, despite the nerf, and Despair later on enemies is going to increase our poison damage even further, but those gloves are also just randomly dropping everywhere. They might be a little bit pricey in the beginning and even a lot of Chaos Orbs in the first 2 days, but if not, you can just use any rare gloves that you find that complement your missing resistances or attributes. We kept our rare boots and all other rare items we're going to feature now very simple. For the rare boots, we're going to be looking for spell suppression, movement speed, maximum life, and resistances. As Eldritch Implicits, we're going to use the action speed and poison steal damage faster. A necklace with +1 all skill gems and chaos skill gems would be awesome. I have a crafting guide, we're going to show you exactly how to get this necklace. The only issue to get a +2 necklace is the all skill gem explicit on it. Otherwise, just getting a +1 level to all chaos skill gems should be rather achievable with some harvest juice. Just look out for some resistances, attributes, and area of effect, and area damage as the other explicits. In the beginning, you can just anoint Corruption because we skilled Whispers of Doom on our talent tree. Later on, when you're gonna make the move to the endgame tree, we're gonna be anointing Whispers of Doom. For our rings, we just want some basic rings with resistances, some attributes, maximum life, maybe some accuracy as well, and you can still craft non-challenging skills have a minus total cost of mana. That craft has not been removed yet. For a belt, you can either use a Stygian Vice or a Crystal Belt if you're struggling with Energy Shield, because Eldritch Battery makes you use your Energy Shield instead of your mana. Some Flask affixes like reduced Flask charges used, increased Flask effect duration, and Flask applied to you have an increased effect would be the desirable stats, but also don't forget that you can craft a regenerate Energy Shield per second while a rare or unique enemy is nearby on your belt as well. This will allow you, especially on bosses, to maintain your energy shield a lot and you're not running out of mana to use your spells. Main hand weapon doesn't exist on this build, and as a shield, we just go for a simple spell suppression shield with spell suppression as a suffix and some maximum life, resistances, and attributes, and armor and evasion, whatever you like. Talking about the flasks, in our build we have suggested 2 divine flasks. The new Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing skill, how we use it, almost 1 whole life flask whenever you use it. This will boost your damage in an incredible amount, and therefore I would suggest for bosses to use 2 Divine Flasks. If you feel really uncomfortable with it, or especially during mapping where you gain a lot of flask charges anyway, and your top damage doesn't really matter that much, and you will still kill a lot of enemies without getting the extra damage from your flask, just use a Quicksilver Flask. For the life flask, just make sure that increased amount recovered and reduced recovery rate is active on the flask as well, because Poisonous Concoction takes the damage from the amount recovered of your flask. So we want to buff this as much as we can. For the other flasks, we're going to be using Granite Flask, Jade Flask, Quicksilver and Silver Flask. These will give us armor, evasion, movement and onslaught. The prefix will always be charge recovery rate, and the suffix will always be the respective one: movement speed on the movement speed flask, armor on the armor flask, evasion on the evasion flask, and attack speed on the onslaught flask. For you personally, you don't have to have the evasion on the evasion flask. It can also be on the armor flask. It just pleases my OCD whenever I have it like this. Maybe you can understand. For the enchant on the flask, we just enchant used when charges reach 4. For our jewels and sockets later on our passive tree, we're looking for rare jewels with chaos damage over time multiplier and damage over time multiplier. Those are already 2 suffixes, so this is already a little bit harder to provoke. Those might be a little bit rare. And of course, a perfect one with the 4 perfect stats is rather unachievable, especially in the beginning. But look out for some chaos damage over time and damage over time multiplier. Those are the strongest damage gain in the endgame for us later on. Cluster jewels are large chaos damage cluster jewels with Unholy Grace, Unwavering Evil, and Wicked Power. This is a commonly used chaos damage cluster jewel that many other chaos damage builds will use, so this might be a bit pricey because there's a high demand for it. I would advise you to just pick up some chaos damage cluster jewels with around about 8 to 9 passive nodes, and then use some Orb of Bindings on it whenever you have some. Orb of Bindings will make it a yellow item, and you might even proc some. For a medium cluster jewel, we're going to be using a damage over time cluster jewel with Brute for Potency and Circling Oblivion. If you later on end up having a high budget, just get a Watcher's Eye. For the gems and abilities, let's quickly bounce back to Path of Building. As you can see in our Path of Building, we're using Poisonous Concoction, the regular spell. The new spell is not even yet included into Path of Building. Old Poisonous Concoction builds included an counter for Poisonous Concoction. This is really important for skills like Rolling Magma, or in our case Poisonous Concoction, because every projectile is going to be adding to our damage, to our poison, etc. We're setting it to 11 because every chain from Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing is going to be 1 full projectile doing everything that it's supposed to do. Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing will initially have 2 chains, and every projectile that we're going to skill to it is going to let it chain 1 more time. With Greater Volley and Greater Multiple Projectiles, we're already going to have like 11 bounces. 1 initial bounce, 8 of the gems, and 2 from the initial gem. We're otherwise adding Greater Multiple Projectiles, and Greater Volley to it, Void Manipulation and Vicious Projectiles, and Unbound Ailments. For our auras, we're gonna go back to the basics. Determination, Purity of Elements, and Vile Grace, giving us armor, evasion rating, immunity to ailments, and a lot of resistances. We're also gonna be adding more auras, like Precision later on, if we can afford it. And we're gonna be skilling it as high as we can, because it reserves just a flat amount of mana, not percentage. Also, we're gonna be using Malevolence and Divine Blessing. We kept it in PoB on level 20, because we had a lot of energy shield. But if you're gonna be struggling later on to use it, and you don't have enough energy shield, just keep it on level 1, but more to it in our frequently asked questions sections. Despair is going to be our curse that we manually cast, because the Temporal Chains curse comes from our gloves. And we're going to be using the defenses of Vaal Molten Shell on level 10 and cast when damage taken level 1. Just to explain this really quick, we keep cast when damage taken on level 1 because it procs on a lower amount of damage. The higher the level of cast when damage taken is, the more damage you need to take for it to trigger. Therefore, it can only support a gem of the level 38 or lower. That is why we're going to be keeping the gem it links to, Vaal Molten Shell, on level 10, so we don't exceed that level. Just another quick side note, if you ever end up leveling a gem too high, you can just sell it with a Scouring Orb, and the vendor will return a gem with the same quality, but 1 level lower to it. This does not work with Vaal gems. Flame Wish is going to be our movement spell. And for our utility, we're going to be using Blood Rage, Plague Bearer, and Ancestral Protector. Blood Rage and Ancestral Protector just give us way more attack speed, and Plague Bearer will add us some extra damage to our poisons. We have linked it to an enhanced gem, but before you're going to get an enhanced gem, you can just do it to an increased area of effect gem. Our Atlas Talent Tree, we usually suggest a map progression Atlas Talent Tree. Wandering Path is sadly gone this season, so we can no longer suggest a 100% dropping adjacent map strategy anymore. I already looked into other content creators like Pox and what their ideas for a talent tree next season are. We came up with something similar. We still suggest players to get around about their 30% of dropping adjacent maps and getting the map nodes on the left and right side, which will increase the chance of dropping a map 1 tier higher by a certain amount. You're gonna get the Keyruck missions in the beginning, so we're gonna get 1 more Keyruck mission each day and dropping more scouting reports. In the middle, you can either take both undertakings or overloaded circuits. I saw some content creators taking both, but you cannot use them both at the same time. They do not stack, because you cannot just choose both of them in your map device. So you choose whatever you want. If you have a certain league mechanic that you want to farm, you go for overloaded circuits. Otherwise, go for bold undertakings. In our talent tree, we have not suggested a certain strategy of what you should farm and are not qualified enough to dictate what content you should play. Many people have suggested Expedition in the beginning because it will give you a lot of currency with Tuyen and good items with Rock as well. So you might want to check that out as well. Our talent tree moves on the right side of the Atlas tree, so you can easily go into the Expedition without having to adjust our talent tree any further. SSF players, just keep in mind that you might want to look into Harvest because you're going to be using a lot of juice. In the top right of the Atlas talent tree, we're going to be skilling the intelligence gathering. I saw this on some other content creators as well already, and it was a great idea. Just by completing your maps, you will get 10 intelligence for a random Immortal Syndicate safe house. This will just proc later on more safe houses that you can conquer, and the Katarina as well, for maybe dropping your helmet, or some Veiled Orbs for extra currency. Because Betrayal has been changed, and you don't really have to focus anymore, unless you really want a certain scarab out of the safe houses, you can just skill this and progress through the Syndicate without having to use too much Bane power for it. This will just passively proc you more Katarinas. To answer some questions that people could come up with, people could ask how to fix mana issues. This build later on will require a Devouring Diadem helmet, as we just talked about. And this helmet grants us the Eldritch Battery talent. Eldritch Battery makes us to use our energy shield before we're going to use mana. In our mid-game tree, we're going to be skilling this before we're going to get this helmet. If you find yourself not having enough mana, just make sure you're going to get some items with energy shield on it, like a crystal belt. We adjusted our POB so you have all your attributes and there's no warning in Path of Building. If you end up finding yourself not having enough attributes, just make sure you're going to add a lot of strength, but you don't need that much intelligence. This build only needs 98 intelligence unless you go for a different chest. Flame Dash would be the only gem that goes over 98 intelligence. Just make sure that you have 155 strength for stuff like your Ancestral Protector Totem. If you wonder yourself at some point why you can't reserve all of your auras, just make sure that Precision is kept on a lower level. Just keep it on level 1 because it will only reserve flat mana, not percentage wise. This build will also later on require the mana reservation efficiency of the unique helmet and an Enlightened gem. If you don't have this, we already accounted a little bit for it by going in the top right of the talent tree, skilling into the mana mastery that gives us mana reservation efficiency and the mana reservation efficiency node on the top right. This will probably not be enough and you still need a rare helmet with mana reservation efficiency as an essence and the mana reservation efficiency of the Eldritch Implicit. The follow-up question would be why you can't use all of your auras, especially the Malevolence. Again, this would be just because of your energy shield, and you can try to keep Divine Blessing on level 1, because it will cost you less energy shield to use Malevolence then. If you really struggle with mana completely, you can also just drop Malevolence and just use Determination in Divine Blessing. You will lose a little bit of damage, but at least you will have your survivability auras all active. As soon as that you can maintain your mana reservation efficiency, you can bring back Malevolence again. If you're wondering how to craft that +2 amulet that we talked about, I have a crafting guide here on YouTube where we're crafting certain items like exactly this amulet. It's pretty easy. Feel free to check that out or just wait a few days because before the season starts I will be hopefully still publishing a second video with a lot of crafting examples and only crafting examples where I showcase the most used items on many builds that people use all the time and how to craft them. Just a whole compilation. To end this video, I would really love to quickly talk about the concerns of this build and the expected damage that you can expect. In Path of Building, we see 23 million boss damage. So how is this possible? Builds like Pecan, Rolling Magma, and the new Pecan will be really similar to the Rolling Magma gem. We're going to be using a count for the amount of bounces we have. This would mean that we have 11 Poisonous Concoctions hitting the boss. These 11 would be always per use, because you're throwing Poisonous Concoction around about 4 times per second. This is the damage we're coming up with. This is a very fictional number currently, because we cannot right now tell how the gem will really behave. Palzeron, while I was working on this guide right here, has already made a video about exactly this gem and showcased how Rolling Magma would behave with the Nemesis ring. Nemesis causes your projectiles to go into random directions. This would also apply to Rolling Magma or Poisonous Concoction of bouncing therefore. The new gem itself will have its bounces in random direction. In the content reveal of 324, we saw Poisonous Concoction of bouncing already in action, and we saw that it was bouncing fairly well around one single target enemy. That's why we're also going for some area of effect on certain items to make sure that a bounce is not going too far from the boss away and we're still hitting with the splash damage. It is right now really questionable if every use of our Poisonous Concoction of bouncing will have all of its 11 bounces going onto the boss itself. This is the only reason why we can really not right now guarantee that this is the damage that is going to be the outcome. It is still going to be an insane amount of damage with just 3, I don't know if I really want to say it, but rather achievable for the first week uniques. But this of course depends on the player. Especially the cluster jewels later on will be a little bit more difficult to achieve, so just take that damage number with a grain of salt. Our main damage also comes from our poison DPS, or not just necessarily from the hit damage of Poisonous Concoction. This is why the life flask might not be that relevant, but it will be also a good chunk of it. Also keep in mind that the new Poisonous Concoction will take more charges of the life flask, and it even has a greater multiplier with the amount recovered on your life flask than the old Poisonous Concoction. If the behavior of the bounces is as we would expect and hope right now with a lot of copium, it would be just similar to the damage of the old Poisonous Concoction that would definitely get you guaranteed, because it's an old build, into uber bosses. But it would even more exceed that damage, and it would be just a Poisonous Concoction on crack. But again, take this with a grain of salt. It is an experimental build. I cannot fully vouch for it. I can only vouch that we this time made a great job with how we conducted our build. Let me know in the comments what you think about this build, and if you plan to play this build next season, definitely tell me about your stories and how it felt. I would potentially play this build as well if I'm not deciding to play SSF for the first time ever. I'm usually a softcore trade league tryhard that runs into tier 16 maps with no resistances and dies 1,000 times. If you like the guide, please leave us a like and consider subscribing. I'm going to be uploading way more Path of Exile content in the future. I will also be streaming it in the future, and you can also check out our written guides for more conventional builds like Detonate Dead on our website, your-mmmo.com. Anyways, Exiles, no matter how you decide, I see you in the next one.